Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State, others receive certificates of return. Senegal opposition leader Ousmane Sonko handed 2-month suspended prison sentence for libel. At least 9 U.S. Army soldiers killed as 2 Black Hawk helicopters crash in Kentucky. My name is Femi Olanipekun. Now the news in detail. We'll begin here in Nigeria, where more governors-elect, including Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State, Umar Eno of Akwa Ibom, and Diko Rada of Katsina State have received their certificates of return. The governors-elect got their certificates of return from the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) at different events today. In Ogun State, Dapo Abiodun and his deputy Noimoto Yedele, alongside 25 others, 25 out of the 26 members of the State House of Assembly members-elect got their certificate of return at the State INEC headquarters in Abeokuta, while in Katsina State, the governor-elect Diko Rada receiving his certificate, extending the hands of a fellowship to his opponents, urging them to bring their ideas in efforts to move the state forward. Similarly, the Akwa Ibom State governor-elect Umar Eno, alongside his deputy Senator Akon Eyakenyi, as well as members-elect of the State House of Assembly, got their certificates of return at the Commission's office in Uyo, the state capital. And outside Nigeria, a court in Senegal has handed a 2-month suspended prison sentence to leading opposition leader Ousmane Sonko for libel. The court in the capital, Dakar, this morning found him guilty of defaming tourism minister Mama Mbaye Niang, a member of President Macky Sall's party. Mr. Sonko's lawyers, Bamba Sisi and Sheikh Koras Yesse Ba, told newsmen that the sentence meant that the opposition leader would be eligible to run in presidential elections next year. Mr. Sonko faced libel charges brought against him by Mbaye Niang after accusing him of stealing 29 billion CFA francs from government agency. However, denied wrongdoing and had previously said the charges against him were a tactic to eliminate him from the presidential race. Paul Rusesabagina, an outspoken critic of the Rwandan government, has arrived in the U.S. after being freed from prison in Kigali. He rose to prominence after being portrayed as a hero of the 1994 Rwandan genocide in the 2004 film Hotel Rwanda. In 2021, he was sentenced to 25 years on terrorism charges by a court in what supporters called a sham trial. His release earlier this week followed talks brokered by Qatar. One of his daughters, Karine Kanimba, in a tweet showed her father's arrival in San Antonio, Texas, adding that the family has finally been reunited. And fresh demonstrations organized today against Kenyan President William Ruto are again marked by violence as stone-throwing protesters clashed with the police. The previous protest, called for by opposition leader Raila Odinga on Monday against high living cost and alleged fraud in last year's election, have been marred with violence, with at least 3 people losing their lives in the protest. This report examines the demonstration since the opposition leader called for it.
Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga says protests against President William Ruto's government over the high cost of living would go ahead as scheduled despite a police ban. Local media outlets have shared pictures of water cannons and riot police stationed in opposition strongholds across the city. Roadblocks have also been mounted on roads leading to State House, the president's official residence. Protesters in the western towns of Kisumu, Homa Bay, and Migori have already blocked roads with bonfires and rocks, according to media reports. Kenya's police chief on Sunday announced a ban on the protests called by Odinga, saying such acts remained illegal. The Inspector General of Police said to reporters at a media briefing that the police had been restraining themselves and cannot continue that way. He said they were ready as the police force to maintain peace.
We have been restraining ourselves. We cannot do that anymore. We must come out as a police service to ensure law and order is maintained. As a law-abiding citizen of this country, I have a job to do, and I will discharge that mandate without fear or favor. Wherever you are, I will deal with you.
Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua arrived at his office at dawn and has urged Kenyans to report to work. In a recent address, the Deputy President said the government would not dialogue with a person leading protests in the destruction of properties of other Kenyans for selfish gains. The massive protests in Kenya, which started more than 2 weeks ago, saw protesters taking to the streets of the capital, Nairobi, and several other cities in response to a call for demonstrations by opposition leader Raila Odinga. However, since the protests broke out, a university student in Kenya had been killed and more than 200 people arrested in the nationwide protests against President William Ruto's government over high living costs, police said. Some lit fires in the streets and threw rocks at police who fired tear gas and water cannon, including at Odinga's convoy, as he addressed reporters from the sunroof of his car. Police said 24 officers were injured in the clashes. They gave no figure for injuries among protesters. The protest is the first major outbreak of political violence in the East African nation since Ruto assumed office 6 months ago. Ruto handed Odinga his 5th loss in a row, although Odinga claims the election was stolen. He, however, challenged the result last year before the Supreme Court, which upheld Ruto's victory. Odinga cited the high cost of staples such as maize flour, which have kept inflation high, as reasons for his call for protests, which he said should be repeated weekly. The Azimio leader, in a brief, said President Ruto's hands are all over the violence experienced, which was not envisaged when the call for protests was made.
Ruto's hands are all over this violence. When Azimio La Umoja called for protests in line with Article 37 of our Constitution, we never envisaged that in desperation the state would respond by hiring goons and mercenaries to rain terror on peaceful and innocent Kenyans.
Temi Tope, Ajijola Oluwaula, Western Spring Television.
In the United Kingdom, new Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf's first question session in the Scottish Parliament was hit by a series of disruptions from climate protesters. The public gallery in the Holyrood Chamber was eventually cleared after the session had to be suspended 5 times in the first 15 minutes. The interruptions have been almost weekly occurrence during recent First Minister's questions. The Parliament's presiding officer, Alison Johnston, also pledged to take action to stop them, with mobile phones already having been banned in the gallery. When proceedings returned, Mr. Yousaf said he won't apologize for having a Minister for Independence because the nation needs.
I say, Presiding Officer, how delighted I am to have appointed the cabinet that has the most number of women in it in the history of devolution. Can I say that I'm delighted to be able to appoint a cabinet that had a number of members under the age of 40. Can I say how delighted I am to have appointed a cabinet and a government that is focused on the priorities of the Scottish people. We have a cabinet secretary for the well-being economy that puts the economy first, that makes sure that the economy works for the people, not the other way round. We have a cabinet secretary for net zero and just transition who are to unlock our green potential on the day, of course, that the UK government have once again relegated the Acorn project to track 2. We have a cabinet secretary for social justice to tackle child poverty, to help us to tackle the effects
First Minister,
of Westminster.
First Minister.
To the Russia-Ukraine war, King Charles III says the scourge of war has returned to Europe as he became the first British monarch to address the German parliament. He said that the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has inflicted unimaginable suffering on many innocent people, adding that countless lives have been destroyed, while freedom and human dignity have been trampled in the most brutal way. The monarch further praised the cultural connections between the UK and Germany, noting that the two countries had laughed at each other and with each other for the last 50 years as old friends. The king, speaking about the future of German-British relations, said heeding the lessons of the past is their sacred responsibility and urged everyone to be vigilant against threats to their shared values. Meanwhile, the Russian foreign minister will chair a UN Security Council meeting in April when Moscow holds the rotating presidency of the international body. Russia Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova made this known in a press briefing, noting that this was going to be part of the key event of the Russian presidency of the Security Council. She disclosed that a high-level open debate on effective multilateralism through the defense of the principles of the UN Charter will also be held. And while Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Russia holding the UN Security Council presidency from April 1 is a bad joke. Russia will hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council for a month, beginning from the 1st of April. Ivan Gershkovich, the detained Wall Street Journal reporter, has pleaded not guilty to charges of espionage, which the FSB security service accused him of in a Moscow court. According to a court document, the court ruled that Mr. Gershkovich should be held in pre-trial custody for nearly 2 months until May 29. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said the arrest of the reporter was not related to journalism. This morning, the Federal Security Service FSB arrested Mr. Gershkovich on espionage charge. As the first time, the United States government is yet to release an official statement concerning the issue, but the statement is expected soon. He is the first reporter for an American news outlet to be arrested on espionage charges in Russia since the Cold War. In another development, the Kremlin has said no decision has been taken on whether President Vladimir Putin will visit Turkey in April to inaugurate a reactor built by Russia's state nuclear energy company. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had yesterday said his Russian counterpart may visit Turkey to inaugurate the nuclear power reactor built by Rosatom. Mr. Erdogan, in a televised comment, said there was a possibility that Mr. Putin will come on April 27 or May to connect to the inauguration ceremony in Akuyu online. Turkey will load the first nuclear fuel into the first power unit of the nuclear power plant and officially grant it nuclear facility status on April 27. In the meantime, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has called on China to press for just peace in Ukraine. Ms. von der Leyen made the call in a speech in Brussels on the eve of a trip to Beijing. She said any peace plan which would consolidate Russian annexations is simply not a viable plan. She further added that how China continues to interact with Russia's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward.
Integrity of Ukraine. Ukraine will define the terms of a just peace that requires the withdrawal of invading troops. Any peace plan which would in effect consolidate Russian annexations is simply not a viable plan. We have to be frank on this point. How China continues to interact with Putin's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward. And of course, China.
You are watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
Mao Zedong at birth, but globally known as Mao Zedong, he was a Chinese revolutionary and founder of the People's Republic of China, which he led as chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from 1949 until his death in 1976. He was a communist who believed in the attainment of power by the instrumentality of gun. His wise saying, "Political power grows out of the barrel of gun," formed the major plank of his revolutionary struggle for the control of China. In the long span of his leadership and political power, Mao Zedong relentlessly entrenched the communist philosophy in China, which emphasized the revolutionary struggle of the vast majority of people against the exploiting class and their state structures. The communist leaders defined the class struggle as people's war. Mao Zedong was a story of grass to grace, having risen from peasantry to preeminent status as China's most respected leader. Western Spring Television identifies Mao Zedong as a major character in history.
Thank you so much for staying with us. At least 9 U.S. Army soldiers have been killed when 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed during a training mission over Kentucky in the United States. According to an Army spokesperson, 4 crew members were on one helicopter and 5 were on the other during crash in the community of Cadiz in Trick County late yesterday. According to the 101st Airborne Deputy Commander, Brigadier General John Lubas, the aircraft were HH-60 Black Hawk helicopters operated by the division based at Fort Campbell. It disclosed that along the Kentucky-Tennessee border, the choppers collided mid-air and crash-landed in a field near a residential area around 10 p.m. local time. General Lubas said the crash occurred during routine night training with crew wearing night vision goggles. However, said no injuries were recorded on the ground, adding that a specialized safety team was going to the site to review the incident. In South America, far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro has returned to Brazil, where he was greeted by hundreds of supporters at the capital Brasilia's airport. Supporters with Brazilian flags strapped around their shoulders, singing the national anthem and chanting legend as Mr. Bolsonaro arrived from Florida in the United States this morning. 68-year-old Jair Bolsonaro, who never considered defeat in last year's election, is expected to lead the opposition to leftist President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. But before boarding a plane in Orlando, Mr. Bolsonaro downplayed his leadership role and said he will use his experience to help his party campaign in next year's municipal elections, adding that the vote he lost in October is a closed chapter. Bolsonaro, who lost his re-election bid to leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in closing a fourth race, has been in the United States since before the inauguration early this year. Colombia has said a plan to move 70 hippos to overseas sanctuaries will cost about $3.5 million. The drug lord Pablo Escobar, who was shot dead by police in 1993, illegally imported exotic animals into the country, including a number of hippos in the 1980s. Following his death, the hippos were allowed to roam free, and a growing population believed to be the biggest herd outside Africa has been taking over the countryside near his former ranch. Authorities hope to transfer some of the hippos in the coming months, with 10 bound for Mexico and 60 going to India. And moving on, Pope Francis' health is improving after he was taken to hospital with a respiratory condition the Vatican has confirmed. Was admitted to Gemelli Hospital yesterday for what was initially said to be a scheduled checkup. In a statement this afternoon, the Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni said recruitment for the 86-year-old pontiff was continuing. It revealed that His Holiness rested well during the night and this morning had his breakfast and resumed work. It is disclosed that the Holy Father went to the chapel of the hospital where he prayed and received the Eucharist. Mr. Bruni did not say when the Pope might leave the hospital, but the Vatican had yesterday said he was expected to spend a few days there. In other news, Toyota Motor Corp has announced that its global sales hit a record for the month of February as it bounced back from severe pandemic-induced parts shortages. Japan's biggest automaker made the announcement in a statement, adding that worldwide production also increased for a second straight month. It however noted that shortages of parts continue to be a problem. Last month, its global sales jumped 10.3% to 773,271 vehicles, driven by a blistering 53.2% climb in domestic sales. The company further disclosed that domestic production continued to show a strong recovery, climbing 11.2% in February after a 30.1% surge in January. In talking sports, Crystal Palace manager Roy Hodgson says he has never felt old enough to retire as he prepares to return to the dugout this weekend. The 75-year-old is already the Premier League's oldest manager from his spell at Watford last year. He will take charge of Palace against Leicester on Saturday, having been reappointed for the rest of the season after the sacking of Arsenal legend Patrick Vieira. It is disclosed that even though his birth certificate tells him he is old enough to retire, the way he feels doesn't tell him so. Hodgson, whose previous spell at Palace ended after the 2020-2021 season, last managed at Watford between January and May 2022, leaving the side after they were relegated. And before we end Spring Global today, here is a recap of our top stories. More governors-elect, including Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State, Umo Eno of Akwa Ibom, and Diko Rada of Katsina State have received the certificate of return. A court in Senegal has handed a 2-month suspended prison sentence to leading opposition leader Ousmane Sonko for libel. And at least 9 U.S. Army soldiers have been killed when 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed during a training mission over Kentucky. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. My name is Femi Olanikbekum. Good evening.